And we thought, so one thing I'll encourage you is if you're not currently registered for the Thursday event, there's still some places available and there's a QR code there. So I'd encourage you to hear from Kate directly, and I'd also encourage you to read this book. But Andrea just offered to share a little reading from that book to help frame our conversation today about a personal journey in caregiving. So I'm going to ask Andrea to start.
Perfect. And I just wanted to say, can everyone hear me? Yeah. That there's a lot of seats in the front of the room. If anyone's coming in late, we invite you down. All right. So Kate says this is straight from like the first and second page of her introduction, and it caught my breath. So I wanted to share it. On that hot July day in 2016, I was so exhausted by the caring grind that I could no longer cope. To my embarrassment, I couldn't stop weeping or even look up. I'd always tried to project competence with Brad's physicians so they would take my questions seriously, but by 10 a.m., I was already worn out. I'd spent the morning packing lunches, running our kids to summer camp, loading a heavy wheelchair into the car, wheeling my frail husband across hot asphalt, and picking up a dozen new meds from the Cancer Center pharmacy, all on not enough sleep and with the knowledge that bills, laundry, and plenty else were waiting for me at home. My good caregiver mask dropped. Tears fell on the coral-colored jersey dress I'd worn to try to present myself as capable rather than a frazzled disaster. As I broke down, the oncologist chided me for not taking good enough care of myself. If I didn't, he said, how could I take care of my husband? Fragile and overextended, I heard in that question an implication that the only point of me, as a human and not coincidentally as a woman, was to care for another person. What about my own life? Didn't I deserve care in my own right? I left the office as silently as I'd sat in it, but fuming now instead of crying. The so-called self-care that the oncologist had prescribed felt like yet another task I resented, yet another obligation I had to fulfill. What I wanted was for somebody else to volunteer to take care of me.
Thanks, Andrea. It's powerful. I think anything that any caregiver can relate to. And in today's discussion, we're going to talk about strategies for coping. We're going to talk about resources, policy solutions to caregiving, but ultimately, part of what we want to do and part of what this book does is just sees caregivers, recognizes that journey, helps them not feel invisible like Kate felt so much in her memoir. So to that extent, we honor everyone who's been on that caregiving journey or who continues to experience that caregiving journey. So with that, and speaking of strategies, Nicole's going to give us a little insight into one coping strategy with a breath and movement exercise to kick us off. So Nicole.
Thank you. I don't know if this is working. Can y'all hear me okay? Awesome. So I know you might be seeing me stand up and say, oh my goodness, this woman is going to make us do something wild. Don't worry, you can go ahead and stay seated. It's just my style to stand up. And this morning, I know you come to these events and you say, great, we've learned so many things. What can I actually apply for myself at home? And we're going to start right out of the gate, learning things that you can do at home to help take care of yourself. And these are things you can do when you're running to the restroom, things you can do when you're sitting in the car, and things that you can really do and add into your life just the way it is now. And the first thing we're going to do this morning is we're going to start by taking in 3 deep breaths together. When I see some of you already adjusting your posture, putting your feet on the ground, I love this. So let's just start by taking in one nice deep breath together, breathing in and out. And on the second breath, I give you permission to release your tongue from the top of your mouth. Relax your jaw. Go ahead and roll those shoulders back. Breathing in. And out. And on this last deep breath you take, really try to fill up your belly with that wonderful air that you're breathing in through your beautiful mask this morning. And if you've chosen to close your eyes or soften your gaze, please feel free to open your eyes. And we're going to take our hands and we're going to press them together. and really give a good press, not something that makes your muscles cry or feel painful, but something that makes you feel engaged. And this is called break. These are going to be the 4 B's from a wonderful dance movement therapist named Unicorn Bloom. You're going to push those hands together, making contact with your body. It's going to help you feel a little bit more grounded this morning. And while those hands are pressing together, we're going to take in our second B, which is another breath. When you breathe in this time, think about, when is the last time I actually thought about breathing? It's something we do every single day, but we really don't think about it. Now we're going to take those hands and we're going to touch our brains or our head, our third B this morning. And this may feel very odd for some of you. You may say, I feel very exposed right now. I want you to imagine that you have a big S on your chest because you're Superwoman or Superman. And wear that big S proudly, very proudly. This is like a very big power stance. And when you have your hands on your head, I want you to repeat a mantra to yourself, something that you really need to hear this morning. That may be, I am enough. I feel calm, or I'm at peace. Something that you really want to carry with yourself today. And then take those hands from your head down to your chest, making contact with your body. And I want you to see if you can calm your body enough to actually feel your heart beating. And you may notice my heart's beating very quickly or very slowly. Maybe it's heavy today. Don't try to change it. And then let's bring those hands and we'll rub them together. Like someone's making a meal that you're really excited to eat. Beautiful. And as you're rubbing those hands together, you might start to notice your hands are feeling warmer. I know conference rooms tend to be a little bit chilly. Beautiful. You're going to take this warmth that you're creating in your hands, and you're going to bring it to your entire body by patting your body. Good morning, body. Wake up. Don't forget about all of the parts of your body. Beautiful. I see some of you going all the way down to your ankles, back, and stomach. Beautiful. And then let's all end with clapping our hands. That's just some simple things you can do throughout your day where you're taking deep breaths. I know you hear that 1,000 times a day. If only I could, if only I could. You can't. Using that positive mantra, something that you need to hear to get you through the day, that confidence booster, whatever that may be. And those deep breaths, yes, they seem like very basic, but sometimes going back to the basics and doing them consistently has such a great payoff for you. Thank you.
Cool. So I want to build on that idea of self-care. Nicole showing you one strategy around it. And Andrea talking in that passage about a doctor who told, a caregiver that they should take care of themselves. And so Andrea, I thought that was very apropos for this discussion, in particular your role as a clinician who provides care for women and sees the impact that caregiving has on your clients. Can you reflect more on sort of this conundrum of the need for caregivers to take care of themselves?
Yeah, I was, as I was reflecting, I was thinking, when I was invited to this panel to think about those caring for older adults. So I care for women of all ages and stages in my practice, not just women around their childbearing years. And a lot of my patients, as they've kind of aged with me, are now in that sort of sandwich generation where they're caring for their older parents. But I was thinking how profoundly some of these terms that I was exploring resonated with women in the postpartum period, which I do see every day, and how that's really one of the first pivotal moments that we, especially as women, are cast into the role of being a caregiver. And how that moment is so emblematic in transforming us, not always in positive ways, taking away our old expectations for ourselves and giving us new expectations for ourselves, in that like mental load of the mother, us being faced with new tasks, in terms of exhaustion, in terms of isolation, all these terms that I help women navigate in the postpartum period through reminded me so much of things that we face when we're cast in the role of a caregiver. But we don't maybe always have the bandwidth to practice the lessons. I think there's a little bit more attention around the postpartum woman, a little less attention when the role of the caregiver finds us in our busy, normal life. We're going to start with some harder terms up front, and then we're going to work on solutions, I promise. But we were talking as a panel about how a lot of times women suspend their own care, and that concerns me a lot as a health caregiver. That's been very noteworthy actually during my practice in 2021, is the percentage of women who, missed their well care, their preventative care, missed their mammogram. And I give it to them. Maybe they were right to sort of be afraid to walk into a healthcare institution unnecessarily during 2020, but the idea that they need sort of permission or engagement or some kind of encouragement to get out and to take care of themselves when sort of they're between a rock and a hard place, or when their energy is spent outward on others, is really, really important to me. There's also that burden of domestic responsibility that has like a really strong kind of gendered component often. And so women, whenever they're adding a new task to their plate in the role of caregiving, have a hard time, I think, giving up any of themselves professionally if they're working, or any of their kind of domain in the home. But that is hard on them. That gender bias extends, in terms of how they're seen in the workplace. Kate referred to the communication between her husband's physicians and her as the wife, like it was something she had to kind of fight for or create a stake for. Often in terms of the finances of the household, either for our earning or like our wages, or for kind of our financial awareness of the household picture, all has a kind of strongly gendered component that is an uphill battle for women. One of my favorite exercises, now that is not the whole story obviously, but one of my favorite exercises for women that I engage in all the time is, I always tell patients that I watched too much Price is Right as a kid, and there was one game that was a huge scale, and the prize was on one side, and the contestant had to put measured bars of gold onto the other side to name the price of the prize to see if it would balance out. And I always explore with women the idea that we don't get to choose as women when life puts stressors on the stressor side of the scale. We only get to choose as women what we put on the coping side of the scale, right? And so I think what we want to do as a panel is help explore opportunities for you to consider what are your innate coping methods, or what you might need to elevate as your coping methods, or ones that we can offer as resources to you to help in a season of your life where life puts more stressors on that side and you can add coping. And that's a really individualized thing, but one that we want to engage with.
So, and then I want you to build on some of Andrea's reflections. Andrea provides his perspective as a physician, and you as a clinical social worker sort of have this perspective around mental health and well-being. So I'd like for you to just share some reflections in terms of what aspects of self-care are often ignored for caregivers, and begin strategies around it.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is that I love that you talked about self-care being suspended, because I think that people are aware that they should do these things, but it just gets set to the side. But I think there's three things most commonly that get set to the side, and one is really accepting the realities of what caregiving is going to be. And a lot of times I see caregivers starting out, we're going to fight this, we're going to conquer it, we're going to, they are all in. The reality is that caregiving is not just taking on these new tasks and these new responsibilities. It's also sacrificing some other things. I think when caregivers start out acknowledging that from the beginning, by saying yes to these caregiving roles, what roles might I need to say no to? And how do I prioritize those? And which ones am I absolutely not going to say no to? I think another thing that caregivers suspend is acknowledging the importance of their own mental health. And I love Kate Washington's book, but I also love Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. And he has a quote in there that I think applies. He says, the battle of being mortal is the battle to maintain the integrity of one's life, to avoid being so diminished or dissipated or subjugated that who you are becomes disconnected from who you were or who you want to be. And he's talking about aging, but I think you can substitute the word caregiving for being mortal. The battle of caregiving is to maintain the integrity of your life. What are all the components of your life? What are the components of your life that absolutely need to stay in while you are caregiving? And then I think the other thing that maybe gets suspended about self-care is acknowledging sort of the richness of what self-care can be. A lot of times caregivers think, I need a weekend away, or I need to go to the spa, or I need, this grand gesture. And yes, that's really great. But self-care doesn't have to be that. It can be a lot of the exercises that Nicole was talking about. I think as professionals, we need to guard against doing what the doctor did in Kate Washington's book and adding self-care as another task. I was really painfully aware of this when I was giving a presentation to caregivers, and a woman said to me, if another person tells me to take care of myself, I'm just going to reach up and slap you. Everything that I have to do. So thinking of self-care is not just a thing to check off of your to-do list. I also think we need to think about, our caregivers sometimes have and aren't clear about what their self-care is or what self-care means. AGE teaches classes in caregiving, and there's one called Powerful Tools for Caregiving where we all practice together setting out self-care goals for the week. Well, in one of my classes, the self-care goal that a student came up with was cleaning out the garage. And she justified it because it was going to feel so great to have a clean garage at the end. Yes, I would love a clean garage as well, but the act of cleaning it out was not necessarily going to do anything to replenish her soul. So thinking really broadly about what self-care means and not being, afraid to acknowledge that your own mental health and that mental health break is just as important as anything else.
So both Andrea and Ned touched on this issue of sort of the onus on caregivers to provide self-care. So I want to ask Nicole to think about, what are some ways that we can take that onus off ourselves as caregivers? And one of those is for asking for help. I know that in your work, you've seen, caregivers unable to ask for help. And I'd like to ask you, what prevents caregivers from asking for that help and support, and some strategies to help them get what they need in order to help continue their journey?
That's a great question. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking right now in your mind, oh, I've used these 5 reasons for why I can't reach out for help before. And what I hear a lot from care partners is that no one can do it better than me. I know that if I do it, it will get done right the first time. It'll take a lot less time, and I can really depend on myself to do this. That is wonderful. You probably are right. I'm not ever going to tell you you're wrong. You're probably right. But how are you going to be able to, this journey is very long. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I'm sure you've heard that too. How are you going to be able to make it through the marathon if you don't stop and grab a cup of water on the way or grab a snack? Do those things to fill up your cup, and you have to ask for help. You might be saying, well, my care recipient doesn't want anyone but me. They just want me all the time, so I have to do that. I promise you don't. I promise you they will be okay. There's so many creative strategies you can use to introduce care. And And that care might come from a family member, it might come from a friend, it may come from a professional. And it's really up to you to decide how do you want to enter into that world of asking for help? What would make you feel most comfortable? And maybe it's, I'm gonna go for a walk around the house. I won't even go to the neighborhood. I'm gonna go around the house while my care recipient is on the phone with their son or daughter. And I know that that person is safe while they're on the phone with that person. And they'll shoot me a text when they're off the phone, so I can walk right back in the house. Something where you don't have to hear repetitive questions or feel like you must be on all the time. So you always have to be in that caregiver mode. And you really have to ask for help and accept the help. I'm sure you've heard somebody say, well, if you need anything, let me know. Yes, put that person's name in your notes on your phone or on a list. Let them know. Maybe that means they're going to bring you dinner one day. They don't necessarily have to help with the care for your care recipient. They could do things like, help me clean out the garage, do the garage cleaning for me. People want to be helpful, they do. I'm sure each one of you in here has helped someone at one point in your life, and it's felt so fulfilling. Really remind yourself that people want to be helpful. It makes them feel good. And you're giving them a gift by saying, hey, I need this help, and accepting it and trusting them that they can do it. It may not be done like you would want it, and that's okay. That is okay. But if you were able to dip into that self-care, or maybe you were just able to go grocery shopping by yourself, whatever you want to use that time for, ask for help. You have to do it, and I know you've heard that a million times before, and you can come up with all of these reasons. Don't ignore those reasons. Acknowledge them, and then tell your brain, all right, I've acknowledged this thought, and now we're ready to move on.
Thanks for that, Nicole. And it reminds me of something that there's that sort of call for caregivers to be vulnerable and ask for help. And I think for us as allies of caregivers, there's that role that we can have by just doing something that doesn't even require any ask for help, right? We can always just bring a meal over. I have a dear friend whose mom was on a caregiving journey with her husband, and I asked him, I said, well, what can I do for Phyllis? What can I do? And he was like, just do something and don't even ask her. She's gonna tell you she doesn't need anything. So he's like, show up with some food. He's like, go watch Bob for a few hours while she goes, she shops, and she's like, just show up at her door. She's gonna tell you not to come over, right? So, I think that's something that we can remember in sort of terms of our support. In terms of other challenges, I want to kind of explore some issues around employment and gender some issues that Andrea talked about. First of all, the recognition that so many caregivers are employed. A recent study found that 62% of caregivers of older adults are either part-time employed or fully time employed. So just wanted to open up to the group to share any reflections just about sort of what are the implications of that, with all this other things filling up your bucket, the idea of how to navigate full-time employment with these demands of caregivers. So any thoughts about that?
I've seen some pros and some cons from employment. Of course, sometimes people's benefits come from employment, and sometimes that feels like a ball and chain, though, when perhaps a woman in the role of caregiver starts to have to explore the idea of either giving up her employment or taking leave from her employment. But some of the other pros, I've had patients exploring a lot of their resources around their employee assistance programs recently, just like one of those benefits that in other seasons of your life, when everything is going well, you may not ever think about. But I would say, especially over pandemic circumstances and the way that has added stressors to our lives, employee assistance programs has provided a lot of benefit. There's also this changing workforce, this changing job flexibility. I mean, flexibility has also happened in the last 2 years. I would say to some people's benefit, right? Some people were working full time and had, the recipient of their care in their home or whatever, and that offered them more time, intentionally in quotes. But one other thing that's happening in the workplace is this kind of idea of the side hustle and the fact that people's earned income fits in maybe around their caregiving a little bit better, that traditional employment is changing as their goal. And that's something I've seen a lot of people exploring for the benefit of themselves and their family. It's not to be kind of couched in a traditional employment role.
I think to add on to what you were saying, there are benefits, or there are advantages, I guess, of being a working caregiver. One is that being in a working role gives you a chance to not be the caregiver for a while, to take on this other, or to reassume this other persona. I know when my children were little, there was a lot of talk about, well, thank goodness I get to go to work and be a grown-up at work because I'm, obviously not in the house. And I think the same thing could be a little bit true in the workforce. There are obviously dangers as well for people who are in the workforce and either have to cut back or not available for opportunities to advance. There's a lot of data about the dollars that they aren't earning, and so the fewer financial resources they have then to fund their own care when they're needing to receive it.
I wanted to explore a little bit more around gender dynamics of caregiving. Andrea talked a little bit about it as an OBGYN serving female clients, but we know that 63% of caregivers for older adults are women. There's certainly amazing male caregivers on that journey, but there is some particular gender dynamics that play out within family caregiving. I wanted to give you all an opportunity to reflect on sort of what those dynamics may look like and how they play out, and things to consider around that.
I know this should mainly be my domain, but and this might not be the first thing everyone thought I was going to say, but it reminds me of something that Nicole had mentioned. Another exercise I do with women all the time, in whatever the demands of their life are, is an exercise where I tell them to draw kind of a pie chart. If you'll think about it like the clock of a 24-hour day, but really like an amalgam of the 7-day week into one pie chart. Draw a pie chart of how you are currently spending your time. Like, as in, I usually only get 6 hours of sleep. I have to work for this much peace. I'm doing this or that in my day. Major caregiving responsibilities occupy this much of my day. Because it's not, especially as a woman called into all these different domains, that the hours of the day are not being used up in a fulfilling fashion, correct? And then draw a pie chart of, so to speak, how you wish you were spending your time. And what I mean by that is when we talk about like giving yourself permission to accept help or whatever, how in your 24-hour part of your day do you get more sleep or take a 1-hour walk, right? Or go to a movie. How do you do that if all of the hours of your day are being accounted for? And the exercise that I help women with is that we are the only ones who can move the lines, right? That's the empowerment of that exercise. We are the ones that can move the line, but we have to move the line. And so where it comes to, I think, the question of gender is, if it's, Annette and I were just talking before this, and she said, how has the pandemic changed your medical practice? And I was like, interestingly, I wouldn't say that the pandemic has changed my medical practice that much. What the pandemic has changed is my home life. At some point, with the responsibility of being actually in the OB-GYN world busier than ever, clinically speaking, over the last 20 months, I at some point looked at my work from home husband, who still has a full-time job, and said, I'm not sure I can pack every school lunch. I'm not sure I can like do the dishes, bathe the kids, and get a good enough sleep myself to be busier than ever I've ever been professionally the next day. And so I started to have to look at my clock and say, how do I get more sleep? How do I get a separation from the demands of being working and being a mother? So that's not specifically answering the gender question, but it's the idea that we as women so naturally take on so much of those domestic responsibilities, and the way we might have to delegate is to move the lines ourselves and say like, here is a slot where I can get more time back.
I think you answered that perfectly, honestly. And I hate to stereotype women as taking on these domestic roles, but sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. And I love the idea of feeling empowered enough to make the line move for yourself. Because you're right, if you don't make it move, it's not going to.
It's like definition of insanity.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Saying like, I expect my next day to look different, but I did not do anything to engineer
And one of the things I appreciated about Kate's book is that she also talked about her anger of sort of having those sort of burdens, sometimes that she set upon herself, of taking that caregiving burden herself. She talked about feeling invisible. She talked about sort of feeling guilty for wanting to just jump on a plane and leave her family and never come back. And there's a gender dynamic in there of sort of what happens when societal expectations of how women are supposed to adopt that role sort of, clash with just the reality of your pie not being able to, address it all. And so I think that there's real powerful recognition of that. I want to open up in a second. I've got one more question for the panel, and then we'll open it up for questions from everyone here. And we also have virtual participants too. So if you're a virtual participant, you can write in a question. But one last question that I'll take as privilege of the moderator. I'd love to just have y'all think about, caregiving. If you're not caregiving now, it's in your future, right? And so everyone needs to make a care plan. And, we talk about making end of life plans and advanced directives, but, and that's really important. I encourage you all to do it. But I think even more importantly is that as we have loved ones who age, as we age ourselves, we have to have a caregiving plan, right? We have to think and talk about that now in advance. So my question for the group would be, what are some proactive steps that we can do to make a caregiving plan with ourselves and the ones we love?
I'll jump on that a little bit. I think to build on what you said, talking ahead of time is a great strategy. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that isn't always going to happen. Some family members are just perhaps not going to be open to that. So it could be the case that the plan is that I know a crisis is going to happen and I'm going to have to step in. It would be great if we've talked about what to do before the crisis happens, but for whatever reason, the older adult in my family is not going to do that. So I just know I'm going to have to step into that role. I think caregivers also need to plan for what you were going to do, plan for how you were going to spend that time that you're able to capture for yourself. I used to work with a therapist who would work with caregivers and say, okay, when the time comes that the person you're caring for can't leave the house, you have to be at home with them more often, how are you going to spend that time? And she said, the danger is, otherwise you find that you have been sitting at the computer playing solitaire for an hour while they've napped. And while that's not caregiving, it also doesn't do anything to replenish yourself. So plan for what are those meaningful things in your life. I think that one of the things that we can do to plan is to model caregiving for the generation that comes behind us. What, as women, are we showing our daughters, our sons, our daughters-in-law about what caregiving should be and about what we would want them to do for us? I talked with a caregiving group on Sunday, and one woman came up to me afterwards and said the greatest thing that had happened was that her mother, who eventually died from dementia, had said to her in the early stages of the illness, this is what I want. You can move me into a nursing home when that's appropriate. You can do these things. And that was a great gift for her. So to the extent that we can pass that gift to the generation behind us, I think that's a wonderful thing. I think the other thing is that caregivers need some sort of acknowledgement for the work that they're doing. A lot of times, caregivers assume it because they're the most immediate one, they're sort of the natural one for whatever reason. Being acknowledged and recognized and thanked for what you're doing is really fuel to keep going. And a lot of times it's hard, impossible to get that from the person you're caring for, perhaps particularly if you're caring for someone with dementia. So seek out those people who can see the scope of what you're doing. Join a support group, find a friend, get that thanks for the role that you're taking on.
On the opposite spectrum of that, I hear a lot of care partners say, planning for the future stresses me out. I don't know what it's going to look like 2 hours from now, never mind what it's going to look like 10 years from now, whatever that might be for you. And I want to remind everyone that if you feel like that planning is more stressful than it is helpful, don't do it. You don't have to. There's nothing that says you have to. I know talking about caregiving is something you sit down at the dinner table and say, let's talk about caregiving. It's not something that really brings vivaciousness to the conversation. But feel free over time to add in little bits and pieces of the conversation. It doesn't have to be, it can be a daunting task. It doesn't have to be that way. And for those people who are, I don't want to say lucky enough, but have the advantage to plan and not be reactive, really just follow your gut because you know what's best for you. And that's the best you can do.
Good. I'd like to open it up now to the room. Any questions that or reflections that you'd like to share? We have Jada moving around with the microphone if you'd like to share anything, and we also have some. We can also generate questions online, and if not, I can continue to ask questions. Oh, moment. If anyone has a burning question.
Hi, so I work as a dietitian, and so I work a lot with mental health and also with clients who are in caregiving roles. And what I found is there are several people who it's part of their identity to be a caregiver, like it is part of where they derive kind of their self-worth and how they feel like they're contributing, and getting them to take time for self-care and to kind of protect themselves has been difficult because it's so much of who they are. So I'm curious if you guys have any suggestions for how to help those people to get to take the steps to take care of themselves and know that it doesn't devalue what they're doing for their and
I have an idea on that. So the scenario you describe played out in one of the nursing homes that I worked in, where the wife lived in the nursing home and the husband was there all day, every day. And like a good social worker, I would tell him, please, you don't have to come every day, go do something else. And finally, his daughter called and said, quit telling him that because this is who he is and you're ignoring who he is when you say that. There's a psychologist named Barry Jacobs who has a great answer to this, and he talks about honoring the mission. And so if the mission is, I'm the caregiver, I'm going to provide this level of care, I'm going to be the number one person, join with them in that, acknowledge that, validate that, and then talk about what will help them to fulfill that mission.
I was going to talk a little bit about another kind of concrete exercise when you're going to suggest to any one of these people whose main identity is the caregiving, some real avenues for what we call self-care, because as kind of Kate mentions, like that's a bundle where if it's not directed, you have no idea where to go with it, right? It feels overwhelming. So I also talk to women about sort of 3 disciplines, and all of these can be broken down on really simplified levels. And the point is that your voice is supposed to be present in them. So one is the domain of kind of connection, connectedness. So you talked a little bit about like reaching out to a support group. You know, if not that you're not feeling the connectedness with the recipient of care, but we as individuals crave a sort of different kind of connectedness. So, you know, walking once a week with a friend, where you get to kind of have a sounding board for what's happening in your domain, a support group. I've told, postpartum women who are feeling that isolation of that shampoo, rinse, repeat day, just drive away from the baby for 10 minutes and drive through and get a coffee and talk to other adults, know that an adult world is out there and you're still able to be part of it for even just a little brief hiatus. So the idea of, and maybe one of you needs this lesson, but exploring connections in your life and how to simply take one step. Maybe it's telling people in your workplace what is happening in your home place, having a confidant and ally, or better yet, somebody higher up than you in your workplace to acknowledge what is happening in your home life, right? The second kind of domain is delegation. If any of you needs this tip today, seriously explore sort of where you can delegate. I went to a women's leadership summit one time, sort of all an audience of strong, capable women, and they said, delegate everything you can. And I was like, ha ha ha, I sometimes do. And they were like, no, I'm serious. If you're going through the grocery store, that's not an appropriate use of an hour of your time. And I was like, no, I like to walk through HEB, which sincerely I do, HEB out there. That's me time. Like I have to see what I'm inspired to plan or whatever. And they were like, if you as a working woman could order everything on HEB at 10:15 on your couch, that's the best use of your time. And it really made me be like, oh, I need to delegate grocery shopping more often than not, But anyway, that's a banal example, but really in your role as a caregiver, explore the self-care that can come from what you can delegate. Maybe it's asking a teenager to sit with the recipient of care for you to take a 1-hour walk with your friend, right? Like think about the roles that everybody can play. And the third that I talk about a lot is like an outlet for what I call creativity, which I feel like Nicole will like a lot. But anyway, anything from seeing a movie. I have patients all the time who said like, I've stopped reading for pleasure, or exploring painting, or any outlet from a break in the routine that allows, walk in nature, nature therapy, anything that brings you back to some kind of creative outlet. It can be small, but I think it's a domain in us. Think of ourselves as like a recipe, and we're incomplete and I don't know exactly what I would say to somebody whose whole identity is in the role of a caregiver, but there's still an incomplete recipe if they aren't exploring some of those other domains, right? And if we can kind of gently help them to, I think they're more whole, they're more sustainable.
And I think I'm imagining as a professional, you see some of these people and you say, yeah, that's great, that's your identity. But I'm seeing so many signs that say this isn't your identity.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of joining in with that person, because you're never going to encourage them to come to that realization if you're butting heads the entire time. So sometimes it may feel like you have to take a couple of steps back before you take steps forward. But I think that's one of the most important things as a caregiver, is to feel like your experience, it is your experience, and have that validated with somebody else, especially from a professional. That relationship you'll build moving forward will just be so valuable.
I so appreciate that question. Just one comment, and then we have a question over here. But I would say that one thing that I've noticed is for people who caregiving is the mission, as Barry Jacobs would say, I would say that then there also becomes a real challenge if after that caregiving journey, the person that they love passes, there's real trauma there, and there's real grief, and that there's a real need to support caregivers after that. They talked about post-traumatic stress disorder after that, the sort of intense feeling of loss and lack of purpose and mission. And so that's another piece that we have to explore and think about as we support caregivers. Part of it is supporting people who have been caregivers. We have one question here, and then I think this will be our final question.
I just know that a comment, because the last 15 years I've been a caregiver, and I did hit that wall. And one thing I can say is that you have to talk. you have to tell people because they don't know what's going on with you. And so many of us are afraid to burden other people with what we're going through. You have to delegate. And I found that by delegating on the boards that I was on, was president of, that those boards stepped up, did the work, and just handed me a paper and said, here, read this. You know, get up in front and read it. That's all I had to do. Going and talking to people, I had people who said, please get into a support group. It's an hour. And the support group was so helpful. And I knew they were out there, but I didn't know where. And they really helped. And then from one support group for Alzheimer's and dementia, I went to another one for grief. And what I can say is I made friends that I still have and I still meet with. You do things and you grow. And age was a big part of mine because I've been involved with age for 30 years. And it really saved me in continuing to be involved and getting caregiving information that I needed and other things. And I don't live here in Austin anymore, but I can say that this program is one of the best that I've ever been around. And I wish we had it where I live now.
Thank you so much for that. That's so powerful to hear that. It ties in so many thoughts that we've all had. I'd love to give our panelists one final chance to make any final reflections, anything you'd like to share.
Jane, is there a question?
We do have
Oh, good.
a
Let's do it.
question from our virtual attendee.
So the first question we have is, could you speak to the challenges when there are multiple siblings? In this case, there are 6, both local and not. And everyone is involved in caring for an aging parent living with dementia.
I'd love to hop on this one. So I facilitate a support group on Fridays for care partners caring for someone living with dementia. And I get this question almost weekly. And my biggest advice would be to join a support group because you're gonna, as the primary care partner, if you consider yourself that, or even if you're not, you're going to get unsolicited advice from people who know what it feels like to be in your shoes. And they're not worried about hurting anyone's feelings. And you will be able to take that advice and it will inform you to make a decision that you will feel good about. And you're gonna have 10 to 15 other people behind you every week saying, yes, you did it. You made the right decision. We're so glad you did. Even if you feel like you didn't, they're there to support you. And just by having that peer support, I've noticed that it makes care partners feel more confident. Even when they know they've made the wrong decision, they're making a decision what they feel like is the wrong decision, I should say. They feel like they have done the right thing in the end. And it's really, really beautiful, that support that you can get from your peers. It is so challenging when you have those multiple opinions popping off in your head 24/7. Sometimes it creates more stress than it is helpful. So getting that advice from, like I said, your peers can give you the confidence you need to make the decision you feel best about.
We have another question from the.
I believe we have one more.
This one says, they're curious about the uncomfortable aspect of financial compensation as an adult child caregiver. Since I retired early as a full-time clinical social worker to assist for parents, my pension has capped my salary. Taking Social Security early helped. I'm in the process of moving Mom into my home so she can maintain independence and be safe as her memory declines. My brothers agree to the rent I set, a third of which he pays for independent living apartment. It's my own discomfort. I don't know how to bring it up to my brothers if Mom wants to help with unexpected expenses.
That is a great question. I think it illustrates this general discomfort with doing things to take care of ourselves as caregivers, right? Suspending our needs to take care of somebody else. It feels awkward to put our needs up there. I think a lot of times the only thing or a thing that helps awkwardness lessen is just to stick with it. You know, the more it feels like a right decision to her, feels like the right decision to the brothers. It also feels awkward, but stay the course. And after a while, that awkwardness will decline. I think I also believe in just sort of laying out there what she's feeling and seeing what your brothers say back. Thank you for supporting this. It feels awkward to me, and just hear what they have to say. I think sometimes what happens when you were talking about gender roles is we assume that other people are going to react a certain way. And maybe if you just say what you're feeling and then leave it open, you could be surprised in a pleasant way how supportive they are of it.
Well, we're at time. That last question is kind of a bridge to the next session because there were some financial questions there. We're gonna, after the break, sort of explore more financial and legal aspects of this. So with that, we're gonna take a 5-minute break, but before we do, just like to take a quick opportunity to thank Andrea and Mark.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming to our financial and legal governance panel. Just wanted to have a quick question before we start. So how many of you here think that talking about money is taboo? Raise your hand. How many of you feel that talking about money is taboo? It's taboo. Talking about money is taboo. Right? Just one, two? Well, our mission today for today's panel is that it's absolutely okay to talk about money. And that it's not only okay, but it's imperative that we talk about money because it has a huge impact on the decisions that we make. So my name is Margaret Casey. I will be your moderator today, and I am super excited to talk about this because this is a personal passion of mine to talk about money. We have Janice Green. She is a highly accomplished and respected board certified family law attorney who has written over 65 legal related articles, as well as the book Divorce After 50, which received the Benjamin Franklin Silver Medal by the Independent Booksellers Association. She is a sought after speaker at several local universities, professional and nonprofit organizations, and national media outlets. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa and high honors in psychology from the University of Texas in Austin, and holds a JD from the University of Texas School of Law. I have got Shalana Poole is a certified financial planner and a certified divorce financial analyst. She's the co-founder of Flashpoint Financial Services and has been a wealth advisor since 2006. Prior to this, she was a software engineer for almost 9 years in the aerospace industry for Raytheon Missile Systems. She holds an MBA from the University of Arizona, Eller College of Management, and a BS in Computer Science from Prairie View A&M University. Last but not least, we've got Barbara Lipscomb, is a highly experienced board-certified estate planning attorney and partner at Barnes, Lipscomb, Stewart & Ott. She started her legal career as an assistant attorney general for the state of Texas, but has been in private practice since 1983, serving a wide range of clients on wills, trusts, estate taxes, probate, guardianship, and other legal related matters. She graduated from UT at Austin in government and holds a JD from the University of Texas School of Law, like Janice. All right, so before I begin, I actually wanted to just share some statistics, okay? So in 2020, Oxfam's Time to Care report said that women around the world undertake more than 3/4 of unpaid care work and make up 2/3 of the paid care workforce. This means that women work 12.5 billion hours without pay or recognition and countless more hours of underpaid professional care work. This translates to an economic value of $10.8 trillion. So to give you a context of what that number means, that's 3 times the size of the world's tech industry. Okay, so it's a huge, huge number. Another statistic, according to the MIT Age Lab, in the US, approximately 53 million people are caregivers, of which 60% are women. I think many of you are well aware of that. Caregivers provide an average of 33 to 36 hours of weekly care to adults ages 50 and older or a child with special needs. This is often in addition to the paying jobs that they are already holding. Women drop out of the workforce at a rate 3 times higher than men due to caregiving responsibilities. As a result, they earn less, they accumulate less in retirement, and they receive less in Social Security. They have a harder time obtaining health care and also tend to incur the brunt of rising care costs. And then last, I wanted to share that in a 2020 Gallup survey, 45% of US adults have a living will, so less than half. And in 2021, that number dropped to 33%. And they even did this globally, so in the UK, only 12% have powers of attorney. So why is that important? We're actually going to get into a lot of these statistics and why it's so important to learn how to talk about this and understand that there are resources available and that talking about it is really not taboo. With that, we are going to go into our first question. So why is it important for everyone here to be aware of the legal and financial aspects of aging and caregiving? Can you share any examples of the types of issues that most caregivers or family members are caught off guard by?
Are you looking at this direction? I think that the reason that a lot of people are here is to reduce anxiety. Because we're talking about issues that are unknown, unpredictable, and one of the best ways to reduce the level of anxiety about all of this unknown is to hear about some tools, some resources, and some pathways through the unknown. So with the legal end, the financial end for sure, I think that just getting some clues about the important steps that you need to take to address these uncertainties is anxiety reducing, which I think we all are into these days after the last couple of years we've been through.
Shalana, you want to share why it's important to talk about financial matters?
Because things get missed, to start out with that. And in life, in general, we all know that we go through various stages of transitions. We transition from a child to a teenager, to an adult, a young adult, to an adult with all these responsibilities. And with all of those transitions brings about various levels of anxiety. And for those of us that come from generations of not understanding the financial roadmap through those transitions, that anxiety and that unknown it basically lends itself to leaving things on the table that shouldn't be left on the table from a financial speaking perspective. When you're in a transition, meaning you're transitioning from managing your own life, and in the context of this conversation, you're transitioning to managing the lives of someone else because you're a caregiver, that is the worst time to try to understand what you need to know when it comes to financial matters. I understand that it does happen. There are times when you're just kind of thrown into it because life happens and unexpected situations happen to pop up on us, and now we're thrown into the world of being a caregiver. And so you don't have time to actually say, okay, let's get ready for this. But you're here now. You're here now, and with that mindset, it's very important to do what you can, to know what you don't know right now, or start knowing what you don't know right now, so that when you go to the next transition in life, when you are caregiving for someone, that's one less piece of anxiety that you have to worry about. We already have to worry about emotions, right? That's significant. When you become a mother, it was stated earlier with the panelists before, you immediately become a caregiver of someone else. What in the world did I just do? And on top of that, you think, oh my gosh, how do I afford this? Oh my goodness, what are my resources? What are my financial resources? I don't have them. I don't know what they are. and this child won't stop crying. What am I supposed to do at this point? Know what you don't know ahead of time as much as possible, so that you aren't managing emotions and making significant decisions about your life and the life of someone else in the middle of anxiety of an anxious situation.
Did you want to share some stories of yours and your profession?
Well, I'll just jump in here. I get to use the rock star microphone. Hopefully I don't burst into song, but we'll see. I'm the lawyer on the panel, well, one of the lawyers on the panel. I'm going to say something really specific to those of you who are caregivers. And this mostly applies, I guess, to people who are taking care of parents, but it also applies to you, which is that as you go through this process, if you're taking care of a parent, for example, you need to have powers of attorney. You need for your mother or your dad or your spouse to authorize you to help them by helping with their finances. That's called a durable power of attorney. By helping make medical decisions for them and being able to access their medical information. That's called a medical power of attorney and a HIPAA release. I think I'm also going to like piggyback on what Shalana just said, which is a big theme, I think, of what we've talked about so far in this summit, which is you have to know what you have. I mean, you have to pay attention and get the information that you need. So, for example, if you're taking care of parents, you know, it's important for you to know where their financial assets are. It may be important for you to have authority to sign on their bank account or to use their credit card to pay bills. So, you know, I think that's just going to be a big thing. You have to like pay attention and know what you don't know and know where to go to get the information that you need.
Perhaps we can dig deeper into that a little bit. Maybe you can just define to the audience, you know, what exactly each of these types of documents are. They do, what we provide for the families, how we use the rules.
So a financial power of attorney would let you manage the financial aspects of your, I'm using a parent as an example. It could be a spouse or a child also, or an uncle for that matter, or a sister or a brother. But having a financial power of attorney for that person means that you would be able to write checks out of their account, would be able to spend their money to hire assistance for them, to pay their bills, to find them places to live, all of that kind of thing. The medical power of attorney is what you need for your person's doctors to be able to talk to you, get your decisions about. Now, the medical power of attorney is a little bit different because you can only use the medical power of attorney to make a medical decision for your person. If that person is either not able to make the decision because they don't have the mental capacity to make the decision, or if they're unable to communicate their decision, then you can use the medical power of attorney to make the decision for them, to consent to medical treatment, to choose between different treatments, to get them admitted to a hospital or another medical facility. The HIPAA release is the federal privacy document that authorizes the medical providers to share information with you. That's also important. And I think in the previous panel, they talked a little bit about the living will. In Texas, we call that a directive to physicians. That's a document that enables you to express your wish about whether treatment should be continued if you're in a particular medical condition. That's the array of the powers of attorney. And let me just say that those documents are, for the most part, statutory forms. They're not hard to, it's not hard to access those documents. We've got copies of them, for example, on our website, so do a lot of other lawyers. They're easy to do and they're not expensive. Doesn't have to be a scary process.
I think a lot of these types of issues for financial and legal tend to be very daunting. But in reality, there are plenty of folks out there who are very, very willing to help. And so maybe the question is, well, who is that right person? What criteria do I need to know if this person is the right person for me? So maybe we can go into that a little bit. Shalana, maybe let the audience know, what makes for a good financial planner? What type of person should they be looking for? What, potential things might be something that might be cost?
So that is a really great question for all professions, medical, legal, financial, etc. How do you find the right person that's right for you? First thing I'll say, match the personality, but you can't really do that a whole lot by flipping through a phone book. Okay, we don't have phone books. Flipping through Google, you can't really match that personality, but you do have people that you know that have worked with other professions. So I would say start there. Understand who they're working with. Ask your friends, your colleagues, etc. Who do you have that can help with legal issues, legal documents? Who do you have that can help with the good financial planning aspect? Because this is what I'm expecting to do. What doctor do you use? And then ask them a little bit more about their personality. So start there. It's a personality match, right? Because you're working with someone in a very intimate way, and you have to be able to feel comfortable exposing what you need to that individual so that they can help you. In regards to financial planning, there's so many different financial advisors out there, different types of financial advisors out there. So you have an investment manager. Their role is to, as the name implies, help with investments. You have a wealth manager. Their role, as the name implies, is to help with wealth. I have a slightly different take on a wealth management professional, because to me, it's not just the dollars of wealth, it's the wealth of knowledge as well. So the way I like to see that is, if I'm looking for a wealth manager, how do they define wealth? Is it just the assets I have, the hard assets, or is it what I'm trying to spread to my family? What am I trying to do generationally? Who can hear me deeper than what my bank statement says? That to me is someone who's looking to deepen the wealth, broaden the wealth gap across the board. And then you have a financial planner, a financial advisor, and they can be a mix of both, right? You're managing your investments as well as managing that overall wealth picture, but you're wanting to work with someone who absolutely hears you. There are a number of different designations that exist in this particular field. There's alphabet soup out there. I don't know what they all are because there are so many of them. And it's great. It's great to find someone with a particular designation, because what that shows you is that they have deepened their knowledge base in that area. But it really boils down to, you could be the smartest person in the room, but cannot explain anything to where I understand it. Match the personality to you, and that's okay. That is okay. I wanted to go back to something that was mentioned in regards to the financial power of attorney. Something that I have found over the years is that individuals, especially spouses, don't realize that financial institutions won't automatically talk to you just because you're the spouse. You have to have that financial power of attorney in play. You have to, because you can have an individual account with that financial institution. You can have a joint account with that financial institution. Legally, you can only speak to the one that's assigned to you. And if your spouse is not assigned to your individual account, and you don't have that legal document that gives you that financial voice, the financial institution cannot talk to you. They can empathize, they can cry across the board. I understand. I can't talk to you right now.
Janice, would you like to add?
Well, I come at this from the angle of the aging part of this program. And the aging part being from the standpoint of marital disruption that occurs later in life, which certainly has a component fallout to the financial well-being. And this is not just, and I can get there later, but not to focus on the potential divorce status of caretakers, but looking at the older generation, and particularly the prevalence of late life divorce and what that can do to your financial well-being, et cetera. And one of the reasons why I think this topic is on the panel is that according to Pew and AARP research, over 2/3 of those spouses who file for divorce after age 50 and 55, 2/3 of them are women. And the top couple of reasons for the divorce, and they're same reasons that everybody under 50 has and appears, but it has different elements later. But the two main reasons are physical and mental abuse and addiction. Those were the major types of engines behind the filing of a late life divorce. And there are lots of differences in terms of for the finances with late life divorce, which distinguishes it from the younger situation, is that you have less time to recover financially. You have fewer waves of the economy to travel through. You have less time to reduce debt. And when I say you, this could be you personally or someone that you might be the guardian of or even the caretaker of. Because again, caretaking is stressful and some people are cut out for it and some people are not. And no one here would want to really talk about the number of folks who cannot do it and who divorce because they know they cannot do it when they're looking at a long-haul caregiving situation. That happens. And then it also happens that the person who is the patient to be or the one receiving the caretaking may make decisions to be divorced as well for a variety of reasons. These, quote, horror stories, so to speak, are out there. In the aging population and the frequency of divorce has, among the over 50 crowd, has multiplied 2 and 3 times in the last 20 years. So when it comes to you speaking for each other in documents like powers of attorney, designated, what I call pull the cord out documents, the physician's directive. Folks who are contemplating divorce need to keep in mind that, and this goes back to one of the differences of late life divorce, is that estate planning is very relevant before you file, during the divorce process, and after the divorce. These are all create different significant issues in estate planning when someone is embroiled in a marital undoing. And certainly, if you are planning to file for divorce, the last thing you want to have happen is your to-be ex-spouse has the power to pull the plug on you. That doesn't make any sense. You don't want that. So you want to keep in mind that these documents are to fit the situation. And if at some point in the future, you don't want that person to be serving in that capacity, then it's easy to revoke them. But also, when this goes back to the requirements of the people that you choose for these roles, trust is what it's all about. it's trust. And you may get to a point where you distrust, and if that's the case, then you can change your orders. But it's trust.
So there's a lot there to unpack. And, there's so many things there. I mean, I think I have come across several situations where we're talking about who is named or beneficiary. So especially in financial matters, you know, if the person you're caregiving passes away, what happens to the assets, right? And if you don't have these documents in place, oftentimes it adds to the stress of grief at a time where, you know, you're really not mentally and emotionally able to handle this. So the professionals here really try hard to help prepare everybody to avoid some of those types of issues that you can get into. So, we have a question?
I just had a question. We've talked about the DPOA and the living will and the medical power of attorney. I haven't heard us talk about the will. So many people die without a will, or they have a will that they did way back and have never changed. And I just think we need to speak to that also, because the person who's caregiving may or may not be the executor of the will. And that's a big thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm just gonna say, everybody needs a will. Everybody needs a will. You know, if you look on the internet and start Googling around about estate planning, you'll find a lot of references, mostly from other states, about, oh, you have to avoid probate, you have to do a living trust, you have to do that. That's appropriate for some people, but actually our process here in Texas, and especially in our county and our surrounding counties, the probate process is pretty simple. It's not that expensive. The lawyers don't get all the money, unfortunately. You know, I mean, it's if you've got a good Texas will that names an independent executor and is self-approved, that's all that most people need. I mean, there's a whole other conversation about estate tax and all that kind of stuff, but for most of us, a good will and a good set of up-to-date powers of attorney are, you know, estate planning 101. And I'm gonna also follow up on some things that Janice was talking about, and also this thing that came up in the prior panel about, you know, using your resources and accessing help. If you hold a power of attorney for the person that you're caring for, you have authority under the power of attorney to, for example, hire lawyers, hire CPAs, hire other caregivers. We are really fortunate in this county, especially, to have a lot of agencies, both private and quasi-governmental and nonprofit, like AGE, and there's some others that I've seen here today, who can help you take care of your person, either by providing in-home care, or I'll just give you an example from my own life. When I was taking care of my dad, you know, I'm the lawyer, I'm the oldest child, I figured I could do everything. In retrospect, and he did have good powers, that all that went fine. In retrospect, I wish I had outsourced some things. You know, like, for example, paying his bills. I wish I had hired somebody else to do the banking, the bill pay, all that kind of stuff, you know, tax returns, all that kind of stuff. Because it wasn't something I liked doing, and it would have been so easy to just hire an expert for that. That's one example.
And Barbara, I think it's important for everybody to realize that powers of attorney, whatever kind they are only effective as long as that person who made the power of attorney is alive. The minute they die, powers of attorney have no power at all. You can't use them, you can't rely on them. That's when the will comes into play. But with powers of attorney, they're only during lifetime. can't rely on later.
Yeah, I think it's so important to emphasize that these are not once and done type of documents or transactions or conversations. You need to have these on an ongoing basis to keep them up to date. Because I think what these ladies are implying are that, you know, when you're not paying attention, things lapse. And when they lapse, they tend to lapse at the worst times possible.
Any questions? Yeah. Sorry, you alluded to like that idea of generational wealth, but then we've also talked about how many things can undercut good financial planning, like life transitions, like the expense of caregiving that Kate Washington talked about. Can you talk a little bit about generational debt, about how kind of costly it can be for perhaps the caregiving generation to either plan for proactively or take on without appropriate planning, either the debt of the generation ahead, so to speak, or planning or financial circumstances, or, you know, how to bridge that?
I'm excited.
That's great.
Great question. That's a great question. So I'll throw another question out to everybody really quickly. Who likes to journal? Just anytime. Do you like to journal? Do you like to just write down notes, your to-do pad or something of that nature? I encourage everyone in here, they put these in your grab bag. Pull them out and just start making a list of who you are financially. So one thing that I think it would help in that regard, and in regards to transitions in life, period, whether it be a domestic restructuring, which unfortunately a lot of us have gone through, that's what I call a divorce, or whether it is going through and caregiving for your older family or your children who have health issues that you need to do that. One thing to do is to be prepared and know what you don't know. And I encourage you that if it's possible, have your parents or the older people in your life, if they're willing to do so, is to journal as well. Create a notebook, a family notebook, a personal notebook, a binder that shows who you are financially. List out every single account you can think of. List the beneficiaries along with that account. And you're welcome to change those beneficiaries as other transitions in life happen as well. List the debts. Who owns the debt? Where is it held? Which financial institution is it held? Get a credit report. Everybody here can get a credit report from all 3 credit agencies once a year from annualcreditreport.com. Helping individuals go through their domestic restructuring and getting them prepared for their legal conversations. I always start with the credit report, and almost inevitably, okay, I find something on there that they weren't aware of, some debt that existed way back when. A cosigner on an account that they forgot about for their child. Somewhere along the line, the credit report will actually help open the door. With that being said, it's a conversation. It starts first with knowing who you are financially, and then let's have that open conversation. One of the questions online last time was, how do I feel comfortable talking about getting compensated for the services that I'm doing? It's so important just to have a conversation. There's power in your voice. There's absolute power in your voice. And when you have that conversation, part of it is, listen, I recognize that you've racked up X amount of dollars in debt, right? What's our plan to pay that off? What is that particular plan? Do we have life insurance that will cover that should you pass away? If not, let's get with a financial professional that can help us look at all the avenues. One other important reason to list the assets that you have, the financial assets and accounts, is because some of those accounts have hidden features in them to help pay certain areas. Not all of them, but some of them do. So you have to kind of look beyond the balance sheet, look beyond the statement. There's one carrier, I'll say without naming names, there's one carrier that offers, and it's very well known, offers an insurance type product. It's not insurance, but it's an insurance type product that actually helps people with caregiving. So you're purchasing a financial instrument to help with your financial planning. Behind the door, they're able to offer certain caregiver benefits, i.e. helping you find the appropriate healthcare professional to help you through whatever it is you're going through. Helping you understand the medical codes that go into the billing to the insurance companies. That's a hidden feature that I promise you a lot of people don't know, and you won't know that. You won't even know to look for that until you start knowing who you are financially. And that will help with the debt part as well. You have to know what they have. You have to know what you have in order to plan for that approach. Hopefully that answers.
So I would say, first of all, debt is a huge issue. On average, it takes over 20 years to pay off debt. Okay? And when you talk about inheriting the debt, what are some proactive things that you can do? So first of all, you are not alone. Okay? I think a lot of people feel like this is my issue, my problem. What do? There are a lot of resources out there with advisors who can help with potentially renegotiating the debt. There are financial instruments that can help alleviate this, like life insurance, to pay off any existing debt. There's other things in terms of how you save and how you spend. What Shalana is referring to is if you do not know how much income and how much expenses you have, and you're not paying attention to that, it's actually compounds, right? Once you're aware of what you're spending, what you're earning, then you can create programs on how to make that money work for you instead of you constantly working for that money. So with that, I think one of the things, like if all of you were to have a private conversation with the three of these women here, if you guys could tell them, what would that conversation be? What is that conversation that everybody should be having right now with folks like you?
Let's start.
It's at the end of the table.
Well, in the context of family law, I always tell folks that if there is disharmony, if there is the possibility of divorce, or you are suspecting the other spouse to be engaged in such thinking, the sooner you consult with an attorney, the better. And I always suggest that you find an attorney. If it's a divorce situation, I highly recommend getting in Texas, board certified in family law. Also, having someone who has trial experience, but also has experience and training in this area called collaborative family law, collaborative divorce, which is a separate creature. It's a different way of moving through divorce from the regular trial aspect. But what I recommend people do is try to get an initial consultation with an attorney who is the best that you can afford. That does not mean that you have to hire that attorney to represent you in a divorce, and you may not need that person. But you want to get the best consult you can off the bat, and you want to pay for it. And the reason you want to pay for it is you want to have that conversation and interaction cloaked in confidentiality. And that way, and you want to be prepared for the initial consultation, taking in the best you can do about with an asset and debt list, but also preparing, and I really find this invaluable in these situations, is preparing a chronology of a marriage that you take with you, preferably provide to the attorney before you have the office initial consultation. And what that does, what I call this chronology, it highlights the major events and junctures in the marriage, whether it be financial events, births, deaths, Sudden changes in behavior, your spouse begins jogging at 5 a.m. every day for the last month or so. I mean, these are red flags, and they're historical red flags to put in your chronology. And that allows not only for the attorney that you consult with to be well versed and prepared before he or she meets with you, it also begins your process of dealing in the macro and seeing the big picture of what may be coming down the pipe, rather than being caught up in the day-to-day tussle that leads to the marriage disruption, whatever. So I would say one of the first things is to get advice, but know what kind you need and what steps, and you may get lots of good news at the initial consultation with a lawyer. But I don't think it's ever too early to do that.
So I believe we're into our Q&A time, so open it up to the audience.
My mother, stepmother, and my dad were in their 90s when she was dying, and she wanted a divorce. Up to the day she died, she wanted a divorce. What I found out after, because I hadn't paid close enough attention because they lived in a different state, and it was a travel thing, was that my dad had insisted on doing the income tax himself, which I found out was 3 years of messed up income tax. So one of the biggest things I learned was you have to pay attention, because they will lie to you on the phone and tell you that everything is okay. And it's not. So you end up having to be assertive, and sometimes you have arguments that aren't fun, especially when somebody has dementia. So, and you haven't realized how bad the dementia actually is.
That's so true. And let me say, in my experience, and this is true in my own family too. If you're dealing with an elderly relative, a parent, or an aunt or an uncle, and you think they're starting to slip a little bit cognitively, they're probably worse off than you think, because the family is always a little bit in denial and wishing for the best, and also people are good at kind of like masking that kind of slide a little bit. So now that's not to say that if your person is having some short-term memory loss, or maybe even an early diagnosis of dementia, they may still have adequate capacity to be able to execute simple powers of attorney and things like that. It's not a complete disaster, but I hear what you're saying. That's so true.
Good morning. I have a question about your perspective on died or in at death. Prepaying funeral plans, is that something that you recommend doing ahead of time? Don't recommend doing it. Can't necessarily access things that are without attorney from that.
So I'll take this question. And it's literally from a very personal experience. I did not realize the power of pre-planning your own passing away until my aunt passed away. And in college, she told me she wanted me to handle all of her financial affairs. Well, I have no clue what I'm doing, but okay. She recognized that she was failing in her mental health, and she ended up having dementia for many years. What I did not know is that she had planned everything all the way down to the eulogy that I was supposed to put in the paper, word for word, and she changed it, and it was lined out. And over the years, she was like, "I don't like this person," so she, and I have her handwritten notes of, "This is what I want you to do. This is the dress I want you to bury me in." So I didn't realize the power of that until I went through that transition. To answer your question, yes, I do recommend pre-planning that. Yes, I do recommend, if it's possible, to pay for your your burial or get a burial policy ahead of time. If for no other reason than to minimize that anxiety for your loved ones. But the other reason is just like everything else in life, inflation exists, right? And the cost to bury my dear, dear aunt many years ago, in November, to be exact, November 2014, is different than the cost today. If you can pre-plan that, if you can build that into your overall financial plan, it will serve you and the people that you love a great service.
We have a question. It says, could you address a living trust? What is it? How does it work? Is it a good idea? And if so, in what circumstances?
Well, a living trust is another way to handle your estate plan. It's a trust is like a bucket. You know, you would create this living trust during your lifetime, and in most cases, you would put your stuff into the trust, most of your stuff, most of your property, certainly in the out-of-state real estate, and then you would manage that as a trust during your lifetime. You're the trustee of that trust. You have complete control over it. It's still your property. It doesn't affect really your taxes or your, it's still subject to your debts and all that. But on your passing, then the trust would typically terminate, and you can design it any way you want, but typically in a simple trust would terminate upon your death, and then the successor trustee, whoever you name, would distribute whatever's left in the trust to the people that you determine, right? So yes, I mean, as I say, in Texas, it's a matter of preference. There are certain situations, for example, in a blended family, a lot of times a living trust is a good idea. For a couple where one of the couple is facing maybe some imminent medical issues or incapacity, a living trust is a good vehicle for the other spouse to be able to manage all the property, and that's a pretty seamless kind of a thing. You always also would need on the side powers of attorney, also a little bitty will that we call a pour-over will that says, if I own anything at the time of my death that's not already in my trust, just put it in my trust, and then it flows through the trust. There used to be, it's a little bit different now because we don't always have to file an inventory of the estate, but we used to do a lot of living trusts where there were privacy concerns about, I don't want a list of all my property to be, on the probate court's website for everybody to look at. So there are lots of different situations where that's appropriate in Texas. Here's what you don't want to do in most cases. What you don't want to do is, answer a knock at the door, and you really don't want your elderly parents to do this. Answer a knock at the door and pay somebody, $40,000 to do a big old trust and buy a bunch of annuities and stuff like that. Go talk to an estate planning attorney and see what's really best for your family.
Can I bring up something that piggybacks on the documents that we've been talking about? And I want to just plant this in your head, and it has to do with the value of premarital agreements. Now, many people think of prenups as the old days of crammed down documents. Somebody who's about ready to walk down the aisle and her spouse hands her here's a prenup, sweetie, sign here. That's not really where they are these days. And those documents can do so much more than just say, well, this is what happens if we get a divorce. First of all, they are really helpful whether you've lost a spouse due to divorce or a spouse through death. It is an opportunity for people to get together and say and document what they are bringing into the marriage. And there is a lot of remarriage among older folks, as maybe most of us know. So a prenup at the very least can identify what separate property spouse A is bringing in and what property spouse B is bringing into the marriage. Why is that important? Because in death or divorce, whether property is community or separate is significant. Okay, it's a significant difference, and I'll leave it at that. The other thing is that the process of a prenup can also be handled collaboratively. The other point about a prenup is that the very exercise of going through a financial discussion between future spouses, that exercise in itself can bring up information that you don't otherwise learn about the other person. Because you need to be talking about, well, what's going to happen if so-and-so becomes disabled and needs caretaking? Is that how does that going to affect marriage, financially or otherwise? What if someone is bringing in promises to pay for the education of grandchildren? Okay, well, when you are as a union, are you thinking about using separate money or community money for that sort of thing? So bottom line is that there's a tremendous amount of benefit from having a prenup. So I'll leave it at that.
We are out of time, but all four of us are available all day today. I know there were several questions that we did not get to, but we are an open book, so I really encourage you all to seek us out and ask your questions so that you can get them answered. So with that, thank you very much for listening.
All right, everyone, if you will take your seats, we are going to start with our last session for the day. We thank you once again for joining us for the She Thrives Summit. This is our first annual summit, and we have had some amazing speakers this morning with some really valuable lessons to help us in our caregiving journey. And we're going to end today by talking with caregivers themselves. My name is Flavion. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications for Age of Central Texas. And I am also a caregiver. I care for my parents who live independently still in Round Rock. They are aging and they are having a number of health issues. And I also care for my husband. He has been HIV positive for 30 years this year, but he has to take 36 pills every single day in order to keep his viral load undetectable and keep his T-cell count high. And the doctors told us very early in this journey that if he lived long enough, because 30 years ago with HIV, we weren't sure how long life expectancy would be, that if he did live long enough, he would probably develop dementia, because we know that everything that goes in your mouth ends up in your brain at some point. So 36 pills every day for 30 years has begun to affect his cognitive abilities. My father had a stroke 2 years ago. He had a brain bleed stroke, and so that has affected him physically and cognitively as well. My mother is a cancer survivor, and caring for my father has worn her down quite a bit as well. So I am caring for 3 other adults in addition to my career and my life. And our esteemed panelists today are also professionals with amazing careers, but they're also caregivers as well. So we wanted to share today stories of our journeys, because through that storytelling, there is so much that we hope that you'll glean from it, and that we can share our experiences so that you can learn from them. We mentioned several times today that the statistics are that 1 out of every 5 people in the US are caring for another adult. And we know that those numbers keep going up. In fact, that has gone up 25% in just the past 5 years. And so we wanted to share this expertise with you to help you, whether you're in your caregiving journey now or will be in your caregiving journey later. Rosalind Carter, who founded the Carter Institute of Caregiving, has a very famous quote where she says that there are 4 kinds of people in the world. There are those who are caregivers, those who have been caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and the person being cared for. So every one of us in this room at some point will be caregivers in our lives. If we have a spouse, we help with them. If we have children, and at some point we may be caring for our parents as well. So we wanted to share this information with you to help you either prepare or help you as you are in your journey. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and then to share with you their own personal caregiving journeys. Blair, we'll start with you.
Y'all hear me? I don't know.
It's fit on.
Now? Yes, okay. I'm Blair Loaiza. I'm the Resource Development Manager at Age of Central Texas. So thanks for being here on behalf of Age. Something I'm not is an eloquent public speaker like these 2 wonderful women up here. So I'm going to be reading my story. So just bear with me. So before I start, I need to out myself as a millennial. I'm an elder millennial, which means I'm 34 years old. Millennials are not 22 years old forever. We're now according to a study done by the ARP on caregiving in the US, millennials are 23% of unpaid caregivers in the US. So just keep that in mind as I tell my story. I want you all to know what kind of person my mother was. In her early 20s, she began caring for a few of her neighbors' children with learning disabilities. Her ability to care for any child as if it were her own led to her opening her own daycare for special needs children called Love and Learn. Later in life, she was the director of a chain of nursing homes in rural Ohio, and she ended her working days caring for children in a preschool that she ran out of our house. She spent her entire life caring for older adults, children, and anyone in between. She was the epitome of a caregiver. She was also my best friend. I was a caregiver for my mom, starting at the age of 15 due to a number of physical handicaps, until the time that she died on December 28th of 2018. I had been dressing her wounds, changing her sheets, and grocery shopping for our entire house for almost 15 years already, when she got diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver in April of 2018. There came a point in her illness where keeping a job and keeping her alive could not both happen. So I called my employer, I quit, and moved in with my mom. We began a care plan and figured out how to live off her Social Security paychecks, which were less than $900 a month. Through all this, I never self-identified as a caregiver. It was so ingrained in our mother-daughter relationship. Caregiving at this time consisted of taking her to multiple doctor visits a week, including getting 2 to 3 liters of abdominal fluid drained from her side bi-weekly, many multiple visits to the Cleveland Clinic to consult plastic surgeons, and doing anything in our power to get her on transplant lists. Mom would always bring photos of her grandkids to show doctors, thinking it would help her case. Despite seeking experts and trying to get her the best care possible, her condition worsened as her other organs began to suffer, and soon we were making weekly trips to the ER that usually resulted in 2 to 10 day stays. We had a routine. She would get settled, usually in the cardiothoracic ICU, and I would head home, make her enough healthy meals for a week, bring them back to her, and I would stay every day as long as I was allowed, advocating for her and spending time with her. I was not prepared for this challenge. I didn't realize how much help I needed, and I still wasn't identifying as a caregiver at this time. At home, we were able to utilize programs like Meals on Wheels to ease the burden of having to prepare 3 meals a day, as well as a social worker who visited the house weekly to check in on us, but it still wasn't enough. Our relationship began to suffer. At this point, I was spending my time looking high and low for alternate forms of transportation, more affordable medical equipment to suit her unique needs, and scheduling and taking her to multiple appointments a week, including dialysis, doing all the laundry, cleaning, grocery shopping, cooking, bill paying, pill organizing, and any other extra duties, such as helping her change her nephrostomy bag and getting in and out of bed each and every day. To say I was unprepared and did not expect the psychological toll this would take on me would be an understatement. I had gotten engaged many months prior to an Austin resident, and I told my mom I needed to go, and that dad would have to take over the caregiving. The worst part is I wasn't running to be with my new partner, I was running away from her. She begged me not to go from a hospital bed, in fact, but I moved anyways. I simply couldn't cope. Last time I came home to visit her, we had a giant fight, and I ended up canceling my next trip to see her because I simply couldn't deal with it. Because all I wanted to be was a little girl again and be taken care of by her, the one thing I knew I couldn't have. Shortly after that, she ended up falling and injuring her hip, which landed her in the ER again and then rehab. But this time I wasn't there to advocate for her. I want to tell you all something now that I didn't share earlier. I wasn't doing this alone. I had 3 siblings, all helping out from near and afar in whatever way they could, and it still wasn't enough. Despite our efforts, she ended up getting sepsis from an infected dialysis port due to the rehab nurses and dialysis technicians not cleaning it properly, and passed away on life support several days later. With an organization like AGE, I could have found my mom safe, reliable, and affordable daytime care so that I could continue working. She could have received free medical equipment and incontinence items. I could have attended caregiver support groups, seminars, and classes that would have saved our relationship at her end of life. I could have attended a matter of balance class on fall prevention, or one of our seminars on hospital discharge and rehab. I could have had a one-on-one consultation with Natalie, our information and resource manager, which would have helped me manage the many tasks I was juggling while finding my mom the best resources possible. But most of all, I would have had a community of people willing to do anything to help me and my mom. I know that if I had had AGE on my side, my mother's quality of life and independence would have improved exponentially. And I know that our last few months together would have been ones of tenderness and care. Every day I work for AGE is in her memory, my mom, my best friend, in hopes that I can do for others what I could not do for her.
I told Blair that even though she said, I'm not a good public speaker, you're going to be amazing, and she was. If someone has a tissue that's not tainted, please share. I'm looking at my sweet friend Rebecca. Well, good morning. My name is Faye Rusev. I'm a sandwich. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that here in a second. I'm going to try to contain myself. I'm also an empath. I'm having a milestone year. This is the year I turn that big number. It's not 30, it's not 40. It's the one that comes after that. In fact, it's on December 28th. I am a wife, mother, 16-year-old, a mother of a daughter in heaven. I'm a daughter of a mama, who we call Mama Maria, that I love dearly and that I am the caregiver for. And she's doing great. So please bear with me about my emotions here. But I want to acknowledge something that Joyce Lauk, Joyce, are you here? There you are. Who's a dear, beautiful friend, she and her wife, Laura, and who know this journey all too well, which is caregiving is beautiful. It's amazing. It is hard. It is really hard. And for all of you in here who are doing it, who have done it, I just want to acknowledge that. I see you. I get it. I'm also an entrepreneur. I have my own business. And Age is a client. They're a client, but I'm also a beneficiary in many ways of their amazing services. So the story goes, I'm an only child. I came to this country, a little wee toddler, not even 18 months, when my parents were studying for their graduate degrees. I'm originally from North Africa, from Libya, in fact. And all my life, I was told to assimilate, try to fit in, try not to, have to say where you're from, because of a lot of fear my parents had being from a country like Libya, you can only imagine. And they came here to study for their PhDs ultimately, but our life got ravaged by cancer diagnosis that my dad had when I was only 8 years old. So I started to watch my mama be a caregiver for him at age 35, as he had just started his doctorate degree along with her. And they're really bright people. He was an engineer. She is a food scientist and nutritionist. And so fast forward at age 16, I'm diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. We don't even have incidents of cancer in our family, but yet it seemed to have found us and taken over our lives in a pretty big way. And so I saw my mom and my dad care for me, as any parents would, but also have a lot of worry and fear about what that would mean. And literally within a year later, my dad was in relapse with leukemia. At age 44, my senior year of high school, we lost him. All family is not even here, so caregiving was a solo act. And I really don't know how my mom quite did it, to be honest. But she did, and she finished her PhD, and she got a job, and she was the head nutritionist for the state of Pennsylvania. Until this day, if any of you want to know anything about any condition that you have, or that any of your loved ones have, she's happy to guide you about nutrition and how to heal yourself. And in fact, healed me from asthma that I developed in college, has helped numerous friends with all kinds of things. She's really smart. And I'm so grateful for her in my life in so many ways. So it was just the two of us against the world. Well, I met my now husband of 23 years, Malik, after Dad's passing. In fact, it's kind of funny how beautiful things can happen when you have such tragic loss and sadness. And he happened to grow up in Texas, and long story about how we met. I didn't really care for him because he's a professional soccer coach, former player, and I was like, dude, all you talk about soccer? He will mention here. But he too is originally from Libya, and so is his family. It turned out our families are always connect. and not any kind of an enraged way. When we re-met 7 years later, he was more mature, and I thought, I like this guy, and I like Texas. So I hurried on down from Pennsylvania to Texas, and we got married. And I was watching him caregive for his grandfather, a diplomat, former ambassador to Belgium, from Libya, distinguished man who spoke 5 languages, who was going through Alzheimer's. So at age 25, I kind of had this inkling about what can happen as people age and how people all across the family are caregiving. So my story is kind of this interesting thing about being a sandwich. You all know what that means, right? You caregive for young people in your life as well as older loved ones. And I'm definitely doing that with the one daughter who's with us here. I lost one full term 2 years after having Yara, who was 2 pounds premature in the hospital for quite a while. Didn't know she would make it. She is thriving. She's beautiful, smart, pain in the butt sometimes, as all our teenagers can be, but we all love her dearly. But I experienced that kind of caregiving at a deeper level when she was all of 2 pounds in the NICU, having to go through all kinds of surgeries and challenges. Then we lost our second daughter, Zane. And all this time, you might be wondering, well, what had happened to your mom? Well, she followed us to Texas within about a year when we moved here in the late 90s and lived in Austin at that time on South Lamar, and then sort of slowly crept up closer to where we were, the north part of Austin, or actually in Round Rock. She was working, things were fine. Then she left the country. She had some experiences that were very difficult overseas that I had to save her out of. And did not expect that to happen. But again, I did not have siblings. It's just me, and all of our family is abroad, either in Europe or in North Africa. And I'll fast forward to, then we moved out near Lake Travis, where we are now. And we brought mom to live closer to us. She had a retina detached. She had all kinds of eye issues. And we thought we were on the mend. We thought her vision was back on track. It wasn't. It has now gotten to the point where she's pretty much unable to see except shadows. And in 2018, I was begging her to go to the doctor and see when, something I didn't tell you is when my dad had leukemia, especially the second time, there were a number of things that had happened when he was getting a bone marrow transplant in Pittsburgh that really soured my mother on healthcare. Anybody ever go through challenging healthcare experience? Yes. Sometimes our feelings about the medical system can be pretty awful. So she said, no doctors, I will not see them for anything. I will take, remember what she did? She's a healer through nutrition and supplementation. So she's like, I'm just gonna do this. Well, mom's situation was such that she did that, did it pretty well. But in 2018, come to find out, she had a heart valve that wasn't working and metastatic stage 4 breast cancer. Fast forward, I'm now it. So is my husband, and really even our teenage daughter have to all figure out how do we care for her and support her. She's got limited vision. She's got these health issues. She really does need to see a doctor. And so the last 3 years, counting, have been that. Since that time, 5 months after her diagnosis, I found out I had invasive breast cancer on the same side where my Hodgkin's lymphoma was. And it's not genetic, definitely not genetic, because we had all that testing. We think, in fact, this was all related to a nuclear reactor that had leaked in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island, for any of you who are old enough to know about that story. So my point of all this is I'm dealing with my own, I'm dealing with my mom's, and I'm trying to raise a daughter in an era where it's a little hard to raise teenagers. It's not like what my life was like growing up. So I think that it's been a gift to be able to support her. She now lives with us. She just had her bilateral mastectomy 2 weeks ago, in fact, this morning, and is doing great. Thank you. But I have to do her drains. I have to help support her. I have to make sure she's getting her medications and her nutrition. that she's so fond of knowing about, while at the same time trying to take care of myself, making sure that I don't allow the stresses of what this is like to compound my own life, run a business, and take care of my daughter. Oh, and be a wife. Support her. There's that one. So I look forward to sharing a little bit more with you, but you're in for a treat listening to Ms. Vita as well.
So can you hear me? Yes. Okay, all right. I'm Geeta, and a huge bow to each and every one for incredible bravery and courage and compassion that brings you here today. Not many people want to talk about this. This is the thing. If there were more of us that actually had this courage, it would have been a very different world. So I came to the US as a high school exchange student to Newton, Iowa, home of Maytag washing machine and used to bygone era. I was raised here in the US, at least given a home by 3 white American families. I still have moms and dads in Iowa and host grandparents and grandaunts and everyone in Iowa. And my parents chose to still stay in India. I eventually got a great scholarship, ended up getting married to this wonderful guy, Kevin. And then a year after he got married, my father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer in India. Just to give you a little bit of a background, he's Catholic. His family's been Catholic for generations. My family's been Hindu and Jain for generations. So right there was this thing of my father-in-law wanted care, but not quite sure if a non-Catholic could have the heart to do it. You see how that goes, right? So at 28, my caregiving journey started, and 5 years of really being with him in and out of hospitals in India, not understanding the system very well, but realizing I couldn't do my job and take care of him. So I left my job. It was an incredible journey. I was grateful for it, somewhat resentful for it as well, as it goes always. Anyway, came back to the US, and then moved to Austin. Got a fabulous job at UT, working at the counseling center there. Started a program on working with interpersonal violence that went national, was mentioned in the White House best practices method. There are 11 universities around the country that now have that template and are following it. You get the picture of rocking it. And then my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in India. Alzheimer's, as you all very well know, does not work with the semester system. And so choices had to start getting made. And just around that time, my mother-in-law also was really struggling in India alone, because her husband had passed away. What to do? So mother-in-law, at least we could bring over. She ended up living with us in our home in Austin for 9 years. That's a journey right there, you know. But the biggest thing I want to talk to you about is my mother's journey and the Alzheimer's journey, and how, like Blair said, unprepared I was in my early 30s. And you just think it's going to be a sprint. You just want to go fix everything, everyone, control the uncontrollable. So I was so angry at the caregivers for not doing it right. I was so angry at the system for not catching it early, not fixing it, not having the right medications. You know this journey. Anger, denial. There was no history of Alzheimer's. She was 64 years old. Should not be happening. You know, she did the crossword puzzles, ate organic food, did yoga every day. Not okay. You see how you start getting angry and bargaining with life when it starts to happen. So, still juggling my job, trying to juggle my job, went into consulting, left the job at UT. Still was doing pretty well, I thought, with everything, but things started falling apart with my relationships with my loved ones, most importantly with my husband, because there was no room whatsoever for compassion, for kindness, for myself, for understanding how things are. Somewhere along the road, thank God, I found mindfulness and compassion training and eventually went on to actually get certified, and I now teach it because it was the one thing that saved my life, my marriage, and my relationship with aging, death, and dying. Because this is the one thing that I wish I had known when I started out, but at least Alzheimer's gives you enough do-overs where you actually have a chance to fix it. 14 years, the last 5 of the years, she forgot to turn even in bed. Right, you know the story. The doctors had said 5 to 7 years, so I said, okay, I can quit my job. 14, I didn't think it was good. I started spending 2 months in the US, 2 months in India, 2 months in the US, 2 months in India. My deal with her caregivers was you work without a day off for two months, and then I come back to India and you take 2 months off. Because diapers don't take a day off, I can't give you Sundays off. You see how that goes, right? The biggest thing I want to say is how precious and incredible it was to actually be in the present moment with my mom. The greatest curse and gift of Alzheimer's is the loss of memory, but the greatest gift is she's always in the present moment. And there was so much forgiveness and so much love when I could put my stories away. And what was so magical was she forgot words, she forgot my name. But when I looked into her eyes, like you have to see the color of the iris, that's the look. Then she would light up. Then she would light up. And the courage and compassion to then be with her through this journey was really remarkable. The last 3 months of her life, I had the great good fortune to literally spend every minute with her in bed, with her. I only got up to take my meals and go for a morning walk and to see that process. So the greatest gift of caregiving is nobody can tell you this with this much intimacy. You cannot read any book. It prepares you for your own death and dying. And what gave me the greatest gift is the freedom I have, because I have no illusions now. Right? It's okay. That's that greatest fear. No one wants to talk about it. And this intimacy allows you to know this is what it's about. And it's about love, and it's about compassion. And that really is what it boils down to. Yes, I wish my mom had had that will. Yes, I wish that she had let her wishes known. That would have made it a lot better. But above all, I wish that I had learned early on what really is important is the ability to hold someone's hand soft and just love. I wish you that kind of love.
Such amazing and powerful stories are these journeys. And I think each of us, that are caregivers have those same stories, those same powerful stories that we share. But I think one common thread here is that none of us were prepared for this journey. It's not something that you learn in school. They don't teach you how to be a caregiver. I often once a year go and speak to a group of elementary school students. And trying to relate aging to kids is very difficult. You know, they think their parents are old and their parents are 20. So it's how do you make that connection so that they understand? And so what I've taken to doing is I'll ask them, how many of you, when you get to high school, you plan to take driver's ed, you're gonna learn how to drive a car, and you're gonna get your driver's license? All their hands go up. And I say, okay, now how many of you in 30 or 40 years are gonna have your parents move in with you, you're gonna quit your job, you're gonna take care of them full time? How many of you are gonna do that? And none of their hands go up. And I say, okay, here's the reality. For every person out there who's driving a car, that's how many people are helping care and take care of another person. But the difference is you learn how to drive a car, but no one ever teaches you how to caregive. And that's where organizations like Age of Central Texas come in. That's what I do for a living, is help people learn how to do this. So I wanted to ask our panelists that, you know, we always say to caregivers, you know, you don't look back and regret on your decisions that you've made, because you did not have the information then that you have now. So you don't say, oh, I wish I had, because no, you did what you knew to do with the information that you had in hand at the time. But there is always value in looking back, as obviously our stories have shown that. So I wanted to ask our caregivers, what is something that you wish you had known, or something that you would have done differently, that could be an example for other caregivers that would help them in their journey? So Glenn, I'm going to start with you.
There was a moment, my mom and I were in the kitchen. She looked sad and grumpy or something, so I asked her what was wrong. And she said, I just wish someone would acknowledge how hard I'm trying, which gave me pause. And I don't think I did that for her, but I think if I had, it would have reframed our situation, because in recognizing how hard she was trying, I would have recognized how hard I was trying as well. That's also to say that when you're caregiving for someone who has an illness, that you can get really caught up in healing that person and trying to make them better, and not realizing the reality of the situation and what's going on. You're not having the conversations like our earlier panelists told us were so important to have, because you're so focused on the end that you think is going to be healing from the disease or getting better or moving on from the situation that you're in, but often it's not.
I would say for me, it's probably the fact that planning is so important. And I think I was so caught up and busy and not seeing the realities of the fact that, hey, you're the only child. You're the only child and the only daughter. Because statistically, we know women tend to be primary, or as it was one time I had read, the most responsible daughter in the family ends up with the caregiving. To realize little things like your mom's not really wanting to go to the doctor, so even when things are not dire, can you maybe try to encourage her or have her come with you to one of yours so she sees that it's not so bad? Because what eventually would happen, or ultimately would happen through my mom's experiences, is as she would go to these doctor visits, she would be like, they were really nice. They really tried to help me. I'm like, yeah, they generally do not. So she just had such a bad, awful taste in her mouth after losing my dad and her best friend. I think it just clouded everything. But then also making lists of who her doctors were and really starting to codify and create like a notebook of that. If I could tell myself then what I now know, just something as simple as that. And getting on top of her Medicare and saying, let me just have, you know, the ability to help you. And at that time, she hadn't lost her vision in total as much as it is now. So, and she's a very independent and somewhat private person. The idea of her being like, yes, let me give you my passwords to everything was not going to happen. But I think ultimately because she could tell she needed help She could tell the vision, issues were so substantial that no kinds of lenses were gonna fix the problem. That she said, okay, but even now, it's really interesting. My mom struggles with trust, and we've been talking about the power of attorney docs, which we should have had done already. But she's resisted. And I finally had a conversation with her about it to be like, I think it's time we get those taken care of, don't you? And she's like, yeah, but remember, you're the only one that I trust. Only you. And I could just tell that was code for not even my husband. Does she want in this equation?
So, I wish I had actually read Mary Oliver's poem in my water. And she ends by saying, in this world, let me see.
Can you hear me? Okay, Mary Oliver. I wish I had heard these words before. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal. To hold it against your bones, knowing that your life depends on it. And then when it is time to let go, let it go. And I think I wanted to control what is mortal and not want to understand the vulnerability and fragility of life, and just make it what I wanted it to be, not knowing the nature of things as they are. So I think the biggest thing I would say, if I wish that I had known, was I wish I had known what stress really is and the toll that it really takes. As I have come to actually understand mindfulness, compassion, and stress now from a neurobiological place, I know that all of the stuff that I went through in terms of exhaustion and anger and resentment were all protection mechanisms coming up, right? So stress is nothing but a cortisol thing that comes up, and that is nothing but coming up in protection for you. So what was the cycle when I was taking care was I would love so much that I wanted to control so much. And then the fallout of that was, couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I ended up with exactly the opposite outcome of what I wanted, because what I was doing was like, about it, And over time, thankfully, with Alzheimer's, and now with my dad's cancer, I'm able to really be there for him in a very different way. The thing that I can't emphasize enough is to understand that there will be cycles of this, that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And that there will be times of exhaustion. There will be times when out of exhaustion and loneliness and by stress, by definition, is a cycle which makes you feel like you're the only one going through this. You don't want to reach out. I cannot emphasize it enough how much it is helpful to know this is a common humanity issue. This is everybody's story. If you are human, you're going to be touched by this. And learn to forgive. Perfection is not possible in this journey. Learn to forgive yourself. Learn to forgive. And forgiveness is simply letting go of the hope of a better past. Letting go of the hope of a better past. We just get so caught up in our stories of not good enough. You're doing the very best you can. And let that be good enough, so that you can be free to love in the next moment. Because you will remember later on, really the love or the contraction. Choose to rest in love.
Our panelists have shared some really amazing points for us today. And in the few moments that we have left before we go to Q&A, I just want to ask each of you, what is one little nugget of wisdom as a caregiver that you have that you could share with other caregivers that will help them make it to the end of the day and help them in their journey? What's one little thing that you haven't shared yet? Would you like to share?
If you think it's lonely to caregive as a 40, 50, or 60-year-old, it's very lonely to caregive as a 20-year-old and a teenager. So, and I would have given anything to know that I wasn't alone in what I was doing. And I thought that I was alone in what I was doing, and I was lonely because I was pretty sure that I was losing my mother. Except with certain diseases like cirrhosis, they don't tell you in 3 months or 6 years. You just keep getting little bits of bad news until you get the worst news, obviously. So I would have given anything to not feel alone in all of that. And if you, as a caregiver yourself, or if you know a caregiver, just let them know they're not alone. And they have a community of people somewhere, whether it's age or in you.
Ditto, double ditto, what Blair just said, 1000%. I'm still trying to figure this out, y'all. This is messy, and I really value this woman over here to my left, yes, my left as well as to my right, because listening to them today, they both bring back so many reminders to me, especially this forgiveness piece. And it is not perfect. It is so not perfect. I had some colleagues yesterday say, "You look so fabulous," and we were in little Zoom boxes and whatnot. "How do you probably get out of bed looking like that?" I said, "Excuse me. You had seen me about 2 hours and 45 minutes ago. I had part of my hair going this way and another part going that way. No, I do not get out of bed looking put together." And this is hard. So the thing that I would say is being kind, being patient with myself, doing the best that I can. And many days that's hard to feel that acknowledgement because you're caring for this person and this person and this person. And the one thing that I've learned is I sacrificed this person in order to do that. And you know, those people in the planes, they're really smart. There's a reason they say put your oxygen on first. I've failed to do that, and it's taken a toll on my own health. And so now I'm like, gonna go to the exercise class, gonna go watch my Netflix show. Y'all leave me alone. You've been fed, you've been given what you need, right? I think that's the piece. And then hopefully attending more of her workshops, because if you haven't been, I had a chance to do that during the height of COVID with my daughter for a 2-day online virtual experience, which is, I know, not typically how she loves to do these. But that mindfulness and that ability to kind of hold yourself and say, I'm enough, I'm doing my best, I have value, and I love myself, were really critical things that both of us had experienced and I think brought us closer. So taking care of you, I think would be my biggest message.
Yeah, be kind, just be kind. Each one of us is on this incredible journey where everything in us is saying we're not enough. And we're programmed that way. We are programmed that way because we have this limbic system in us that is so based in fear, but we are also programmed to be incredibly good, compassionate, and generous. That is also there. Just remember though, neuroscience, the scientist in me always comes out, like the neuroscience and Dan Siegel will always tell you that limbic response, this innate fear, always supersedes the compassionate, kind response if you're not aware. So we just have to be aware that we have to cultivate kindness. The other thing, and I think Blair really talked about this, but it was so powerful for me to turn towards understanding my mother's fear, my mother-in-law's fear, their fear of death and dying was tremendous. And when I could actually see my mom as this child that needs my help and that she's scared, then the tantrums in the bathroom and around changing the diapers took on a different kind of image. So you have to really understand, like I still remember in the early days, you know, there was one night when she had like 25 times that she had to go to the bathroom. I was like, Mom, like seriously, you can't have any in you left. She did. And then now I see when I get so scared and I have to go to the bathroom like one more time before, you know, I better go before I present. It's just we're really soft and take care of yourself. Take those micro moments. Keep some chocolate in.
In just the couple of minutes that we have left, I wanted to share what I have learned as a gay man who is a caregiver. You know, I grew up in the era where being gay was not an acceptable thing. It was not RuPaul's Drag Race and rainbows and unicorns. It was hiding and fear of being beat up. And it was a very different time. And to, you know, hide that from my family from a very long time. And now being the one that is caring for my parents openly with a husband. That what I have learned is it's okay to say, I need help. You know, I spent so much of my life putting up walls, and now I have to tear them back down. And I always tell folks, you know, it's okay to say, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I need some help. I'm lost. And, you know, I have no clue how to deal with this situation. That's okay. Because as I mentioned, nobody teaches us how to do this. You know, we're kind of stumbling along best we can and hoping that we're doing everything right. Well, there are organizations, there are the support groups, there are amazing people with stories they can share. And it's okay to say, I need some help, because all of us need help at some point in our life. So I also want to say thank you to these amazing people. It was not an easy thing to get up in front of a bunch of strangers and lay your soul bare and tell stories of such intimacy. So I thank you so much for the bravery in doing that, because I think every one of us has a nugget that we've got out of this that we can take home. I want to thank the St. David's Foundation. I want to thank HB for helping us put on this amazing event. This is our first inaugural event, and we plan to do this every year. And I want to thank you personally for coming, because I know it takes a lot out of your day to come and do this. But I want to thank you for your energy and your questions and being here, because you individually have helped enrich this experience. So thank you so much.
Please join me in thanking all of our panelists from today. My name is Megan Holbrecht, and I'm one of your co-chairs for She Thrives. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've learned something valuable, and more importantly, we hope you'll continue the conversation started today with your families. The key to successful aging and caregiving is being proactive. We hope today was just the start of helping you better prepare for your future. A great way to continue this conversation is to utilize AGE of Central Texas. AGE is here to help older adults and caregivers, like all of us, navigate the challenges of aging and caregiving with expert support and care. Check out their table in the lobby to learn more about the services they have to offer. I want to add to Rob's thank you of HEB for donating these bags and the journals you received today. We all love our HEB. On your table, you'll see a survey we'd appreciate you completing to tell us how we did and what topics you'd like to see covered next year.
You can leave your completed surveys on the table to be picked up. You'll also see a QR code where you can make a donation to help age care for family caregivers in our community. Finally, you'll see a QR code to purchase a ticket to the She Thrives dinner on Thursday. Kate Washington, the author of Already Toast, Caregiver Burnout in the United States, will be delivering our keynote address, and Marcia Ball will be performing live. It's going to be an amazing night, and all of the money raised will be used to support caregivers. We are almost sold out. The tickets are limited, so purchase yours today if you're interested. We have some light bites and drinks available at the back of the ballroom for you to enjoy while checking out the vendor fair. Don't forget to enter your name into the drawing. That's at the Age of Central Texas table for Kendra Scott Jewelry. The drawing will be at 12:30 and you must be present to win. So please shop and enjoy. And again, thank you very much for coming.